Okay, everyone, thank you for your patience whilst we just got things reset. And hello, as ever, to our virtual audience who are watching from home or the office. And don't forget, if there's any sessions you have missed today, you can always pick up and watch back any sessions online. Everything will be up on our YouTube channel over the next couple of days, so they're worth finding too. So this is our next panel discussion here on Stage 2 at Procurement and Supply Chain Live London 2023, and that is the Supply Chain Transformation Forum. It's a broad topic, there's a lot for us to get through, and as ever we'll come to your questions at the end of the session. So I'll just interview our panel for this. We have at the end we have Phil Peters, Head of Supply Chain Services at YF. In the centre we have Richard Bolton, Vice President Supply Chain Technology and Transformation at Capgemini Invent. And closest to me we have Phil Coughlin, Group Transformation Director, Supply Chain Director at Servitec Group. Warm welcome to our panel, please. Okay, as I said, plenty to get through, and I will start with the most underarm of underarm questions because this is an incredibly broad topic. We'll start from a place of advice, really. If there is someone in the room or watching from home or watching this back, they're wanting and they know they need to transform their supply chain and go about doing that. Where on earth did you start? Because it is such a huge task to do. And Phil Peters, I will start with you.
That's the underarm question, is it?
Yes.
Where to start? Yeah, listen, firstly, great to be here with these panellists, talking about what I get to do every day, which is always a pleasure. Where do you start? I mean, So I head up the supply chain team at YF. We used to be called Young Foodies. We are no longer young and no longer focused on food, so we needed a bit of a refresh there. But we work with lots of brands, typically challenger brands, who are looking to achieve mainstream scale quickly. And for sure, one of the ways to achieve that is through sorting out your supply chain and getting it right. I think like with most things in life, you need to start with a plan. You need to start with a pretty robust plan, but also be open to the idea that that's going to change, and we've probably seen that more than ever over the last, we used to say year or two, but it's probably the last 7 or 8 years, kind of the Brexit, ever since Brexit really, the kind of curveballs that are being thrown all the time. So I'd say start with a plan, start with a bought-in leadership team who kind of care about what you're doing, and yeah, I think a plan and an engaged leadership and a real appreciation that these things take time. There's going to be a lot of change that needs to be managed carefully, a lot of communication that's going to need to happen. But ultimately, yeah, if you don't start with a plan, then the chances of success are very, very limited.
Okay, Phil, Richard Bolton.
Thank you. So Richard Bolton, I'm with Capgemini. I've been in consulting for about 15 years. In that time, worked with a broad range of companies, a broad range of industries, multinationals, many of whom are looking at supply chain transformation, operation transformation. Wholeheartedly agree with what Phil says. You know, the plan, the engaged leadership are key, and those are definite elements for success we've seen, and missing can be obviously part of a failure of a transformation. I think augmenting what Phil says, the vision is absolutely key, and yes. Supply chain transformation, as a phrase, could lead companies in many directions. You know, there are different ways to transform. There's going digital. There's purchase. There's procurement. There's buying companies. There's separating out. There's moving the supply chain around. There's all sorts of ways to do it, which I'm sure we'll come to later as we discuss. But having that vision on where the organisation wants to go, and then rallying people behind that, is absolutely essential. I think a supply chain transformation. It's about the people in the organisation as much as anything else. It's about changing the paradigms, changing the ways of working. Digital is a great enabler, and there are many digital tools, and many, many more are coming to top of mind at the moment. There's a bit of a rush in that direction. But having the people on board, having that vision, the team subscribing to it, whether that's a company based in the UK with a relatively small supply chain, whether that's a global group where you're trying to change supply chains in market and global, it all comes down to knowing where you're going and having, as Phil says, having that plan and that engagement to get there.
Okay, Phil Coughlin.
Yeah, hi, I'm Phil Coughlin. I'm now the Transformation Director and, for the time being, the Supply Chain Director at Servitec Group. We're a manufacturer of survival equipment. So whenever you fly on an aeroplane, the life jacket under your seat was almost certainly made by us. And if you ever find yourself flying F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, we will have made all of the clothes that you are wearing except for your helmet as well. You're more likely to be in the former situation than the latter, I suspect. To my mind, having sort of worked on a couple of companies that do these transformations, is that you really have to start with an understanding of the strategy for the business. A supply chain transformation doesn't sort of sit alone from everything else the business is doing. So understanding, what is the business trying to do strategically and how does it add value to the customer? And what's the role of the supply chain in that? So is the supply chain simply something that has to be as good as everybody else in the industry? And how good actually is that? We talked earlier about the idea that you can lose business if your supply chain doesn't keep up, or do you simply have to have a good enough supply chain? And then I think once you know that and you know what your supply chain contributes, you can then think about what are the capabilities in that supply chain. Is it about speed of delivery? Is it about flexibility to take you to where you need to go? And then all those other aspects around it that we talked about, so having the right team in place, the right leadership team that generally want it and know why you're there. And I think also having the time. I think that was a really important observation. Every business, every owner, particularly if you work for PE, they want everything to be better, but the transformation is the bit you do on the way to getting better. And actually, therefore, having that willingness, that interest to commit the time and commit to a course of action from the management is absolutely critical.
One thing I will say, Phil, if anyone can introduce their role by referencing a fighter jet, I think you get bonus points. So that's apologies for that, gents. One thing I will start with is I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. We're talking about a plan, we're talking about a vision, we're talking about redesigning. Where do you actually start with that plan? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people who there's unknowns. They don't know how to go about redesigning. They don't know what their options are for redesigning. How do you actually get that visibility of coming up with what you do need? Because you've got to start somewhere. I'll put that out to all of you.
I'm happy to pick that up, and you gents will add to it. In that, I think understanding what other people have done. I think one of the great things we can do at forums like this, provide us the opportunity, is learn from what others have done around us. Learn from mistakes, and more importantly, learn from successes of others. Supply chains are changing radically. There's no doubt about that. What we look at today, there's been, with the Amazonification, if I can use that phrase, of supply chains, has changed the world we live in. There are expectations on all of us, whatever industry we're in, that we can give reliable delivery dates, that they're super fast, super accurate, and that they fit with what the customer or the end consumer wants. So around that then is understanding, okay, how have other people got there? What are the journeys people have gone on? What are the pitfalls to look after, and what are the key success criteria? And it is about the people, it's about the processes, and about the technology, and all of them have to move together. I think by using digital technologies, using what are now becoming fast established technologies, cloud computing 5 years ago was a technology discussion. It's now a business discussion. Businesses would expect to have the capabilities from the cloud, that speed, that volume of data they can use and call on the analytics they can apply to it. And so those capabilities are key, and they're essential, and they're there. But all in all, we live in a big world. We can share information, and seeing how other people have succeeded is, I think, a really important way to start.
Yeah, I'd kind of piggyback on that a little bit. I think data-driven is kind of buzzword at the moment, but so crucial. And the benefit of working with much bigger organisations is that maybe it's a benefit, maybe it's a challenge sometimes, but you do have access at least to a large amount of data. How good that data is probably varies. And kind of in my past, working at Tesco, working for a range of different businesses in my consulting days, having access to that was particularly helpful. Where I'm at now, I have the pleasure of kind of building a lot of supply chains from scratch, which again presents different challenges, but the beauty, I suppose, is that it's you can avoid a lot of the pitfalls that you experience down the line at various stages of growth if you set up for success from the start. But I think the data piece, is obviously a challenge in those examples because you just don't have access to it, and it's so crucial. And having done a lot of that kind of transformation work in my Tesco days, just being able to understand, to use, even 10 years ago we were using elements of AI and machine learning to understand stock holding, to reduce waste, to increase availability, to route plan better, all the various things you need to set up a successful direct-to-consumer business. There's a lot of that good stuff that we can apply and learn from the best, really.
Certainly when I started, thank you very much. And certainly when I'd started with the supply chain role at Savitec, one of the first things I did was to try to get a grip of the data that we had on the supply chain. And fundamentally, if you don't have it and you don't know what's going on, you don't know how you're performing, you don't know where to improve. So without it, you're basically trying to run blind, and that's never going to work. And I think many of the businesses I've worked in have said, the data's no good. But actually, often that's not the case. If you've got a shipping provider sending you data for where your shipment is, the data is almost certainly perfectly good. The challenge is, do we know how to ingest that data? Do we know how to manipulate it? And when we get it out, do we have a set of people who genuinely understand what to do with it? So one of our first activities in transforming our supply chain was to set up a set of dashboards that just answered a set of basic KPIs. Do we know where we are? Do we know what level of service we're providing? Do we know what stock we've genuinely got? And then when you know that, you can start to identify the bits that you can really change. So to me, it's just the fundamental bit that underpins everything you're going to do within a supply chain.
That leads me on very nicely to sort of the technology part of the conversation I wanted to go into a little bit later, but we'll go to it now because we've sort of stumbled across it. And it has been a common theme today about selecting the right technology partners, because there are so many solutions out there, so many great ideas, so many exciting new ideas. When you're putting together a transformation project, you've got to get your partners right. They've got to be the ones that fit in with that. What advice would any of you have of coming up with the right technology partners to achieve what your aims are?
I think the thing I'd say is I am typically working with smaller businesses now, and I think being very selective about those partners is crucial, not just because of the costs involved, but because the technology is generally only as good as the people using it. I think where we'll be in 5 to 10 years is probably, there'll be a lot more that machines can do that won't require the individuals behind them to be able to to be constantly day to day having to impact that. But I think at the moment, generally where we see failings in kind of technology implementation is where you don't have the right change program in place behind them. The most obvious one from my background is inventory management. A lot of businesses will start off with a load of spreadsheets and get to a point where, okay, we need some tech in behind it to enable us to manage what we've got in our warehouse, what we've got with our manufacturer, what we've got in, wherever it is in the business. But again, you have lots of implementations, you have lots of integrations, and unless you're actually doing something with that data and making it work for you, then actually the likelihood is it's just going to be a big expense and not going to achieve what you've set out for it to achieve. So yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is making sure you've got your change program in place alongside any implementation that you're doing.
Yeah, I'd agree with that entirely. Putting new tech in it's not, I don't think it's that difficult. There's a whole range of different things you can choose from, AI all over the place. You have to avoid the risk of getting into what I'd call happy engineering, where you find a lot of nice solutions and put them in because they look great. And then you try to work out what problem they're solving. And I think if you can start with that problem, it then makes the change management bit easier, because people feel that technology has been put in place to do something they need. And if there's no call for it for people on the ground, and we see this with pricing as much as anything, where you put in great systems that give you good pricing information and actually no one understands why this works, how it works, or why it can't do it better than them. We've been setting prices for 20 years, probably wrong. Until you get that bit right, it doesn't matter. You can put tech in all over the place and it will just die out. The people have got to want it and know why it's good for them.
I'm going to dance carefully around this subject as I work for a transformation provider and consultancy, so please take my answer as it comes. So I think one of the keys is finding a partner who shares your vision. That he wants to achieve the same things that you want to achieve, has the same views on scalability, on business outcomes, the journey to get there. Because the technology is key, and I think as Phil and Phil have both said, it's only a component. It's a part of what we want to try and achieve in transformation. Actually, it's the people, and it's how the new technologies, new processes, new systems, new operating model will be used afterwards. And one of the most successful transformations I've been involved in was with a client who knew at the beginning that what they wanted to produce had to be scalable. So it was produced in one plant, it was around a manufacturing operation, and many transformations previously had died because they were done for one plant and one plant alone and never scaled out. And it was painful going through a scalable transformation, because the first plant had to make all the investment. They carried internally the cost for the rest of their organisation. So that was a battle for them to accept that and take that on their P&L. And likewise, there were challenges around IT security, around technology that had to be overcome. But by overcoming it and going through that pain curve together, we found ourselves in a position at the end where they had a scalable solution. And it was now able to be rolled out around their plants around the world. It was much more pick and place where they wanted to go. And so they'd done that proving ground on the first site, but thought big and thought large and been willing to make that investment to get there. And I think that's important too. It goes back to the end goal and knowing what that is and being committed to making it.
Oh, Richard, you've led us really nicely into implementation, which is... Well, feel free. Phil, carry on.
I was just going to follow up on something you said there. I think that it's part of the buy-in is that when you're doing that first step, having the buy-in as well from senior managers is really important. Because if you're doing something where you're trying to be scalable and roll it out in different places, the first one is the hardest. By a long way, it's where you make the mistakes, it's where you get it wrong. And in any sort of change that you're trying to drive, when you've got an end goal to get to, the quickest way of getting to that end goal is, exactly as the Romans knew, the quickest way between 2 points was to keep going in a straight line. And the risk is that if your first one, as soon as it starts struggling and you lose the support of senior managers, that's it. You're sort of off that straight path and suddenly they're onto something else. So having people at CFO, CEO level knowing why we're doing this and what it's going to bring for them is really important to keep that straight line going through those early phases as well.
As I said, that's another strand of implementation, because, as I said in a previous session, whenever I do webinar content on transformation, a question you can guarantee will always get in is, there's a business to run whilst we're trying to do this transformation. How do you go about operating a live, successful business whilst potentially trying to introduce something quite large, something a really significant transformation? Phil, I can see some very frantic nodding at the end. You have experience of this.
You're just teeing us up as consultants to offer our services in, aren't you? Ultimately, for a lot of businesses, if you're running a lean business or you're running a business where everybody knows what their job is, then a big change program is either you've got a team in place for special projects like that, or you rely on experts from outside the business to come in and support. And I think the best consultants are the ones that come in that know what it is they want to achieve, that are keen to implement, but also then keen to transition into business as usual, the changes that they've made, obviously requiring all the things we've talked about around invested leadership, empowered employees. Can't do any of it without them. But ultimately, that's the risk, and the risk as well is it's a risk if we do it, but it's probably a bigger risk if we don't do it. And engaging the team and empowering the team to do that, I think is crucial to just make that successful.
Yeah, I think added to that, and this will sound a bit twee perhaps, but a transformation program changes how the business operates. It doesn't change its values, and it doesn't change the core and the heart and the essence of the business. And so, whether outsiders are coming in to deliver it, whether it's insiders who are there, whether hopefully it's a combination, which is probably the best formulation. It comes down to having the people who are engaged and committed. But every organisation I've worked with who's gone on a transformation program has done it to a degree their way, because it's had to fit in with their organisation, with their ways of working. Now that may be how they run the governance and where the reporting goes up to, where the decisions are made, whether they're made collectively. I worked for one client, a Japanese client, who wanted everybody to buy into every decision. It was lengthy, but when we got there, the decisions that were made about the supply chain, how it was going to change, were bought into, and they were agreed, and they were able to be rolled out around their European organisation. Other clients want to go more directive and we'll have a program manager or a business lead whose job it is to say, actually, this is the way we're going, and I'm going to knock down the obstacles to get there. And in both cases, it fitted with the organisation, it fitted with their culture, and it fitted with their way of working. And the transformation leads to new ways of working and leads to new operating, but will often have the same heart of the company there, and that has to remain at the end.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what a chief transformation officer brings to a business. Where I've seen things not work is often where you've either got somebody who's got a day-to-day job running an operation or a factory. The day-to-day job's already overwhelming. You drop onto them a large transformation project, and it just doesn't even get the bandwidth. Equally, a transformation director who ends up getting too much into the BAU, trying to manage inventory levels and things that should be day-to-day, gets into the same place. So often that team you have between a COO and a CTO, where one person's able to focus on the here and now, making it work, keeping the ship steered, and your transformation officer who is looking much further ahead. He's almost like the navigator in the ship. He's thinking about how do we go down this path? Keeping those two things, I think, in separate people, but having them working very closely, and having them working at board level is a great way of achieving that.
One thing to consider, though, is the supply chain or procurement operation within a business is just one cog in a bigger wheel. How do you go about reducing any potential friction with other departments? Because if there's significant changes in the supply chain about how you go about doing that, it may mean other parts of the business are having to do things differently, whether it's finance or marketing or however. How do you go about reducing any friction with them to make sure it supports what you're trying to achieve?
Well, I wish there was a magic answer to that one.
Oh, I wish there was.
And I think it is, supply chain is one of the core underpinning functions within the business. It has to be closely interlinked with finance. It always will be. It has to supply the customers. It has to be able to deliver the goods on time. And I think supply chain transformation is part of a business transformation. It's part of a holistic view. And if we're transforming one part on its own, it needs to be, that needs to be known at the start, where that fits. Why? And the question, I think, comes back to why transform just supply chain when actually we need the finance to support it, we need marketing to support it, we need order management to support it, and it all fits together. So unilateral transformation is probably risky in itself. It may look at bringing some small-term benefits, but if it's part of a bigger program of works, part of a bigger change and transformation, particularly with the links with order management, with the links with finance, the other key parts that touch on supply chain, then the opportunities are there. I think we're seeing in the manufacturing world much more the alignment, digital alignment coming more and more between design, engineering and manufacturing, rather than some of the more historic paper-based interfaces where drawings were being produced and changes were being produced. And that is bringing new ways of working to, particularly in engineer-to-order companies, where the opportunities to remove inertia between design functions, engineering functions, manufacturing functions, supply chain, warranty, and all these areas are coming down. That needs a change to come with it, and that needs a adaptation to how people can work in a digital way.
I think the constant battle I'm always finding in supply chain is between sort of what sales want from me and what finance wants from me. If my CFO had his way, I'd have absolutely no inventory whatsoever so that he'd have all his cash back. And my salespeople would like me to buy in 100 things just in case they happen to sell one of them at some point in the future. So you've got that as a particular tension. And often I find having people understand that as a supply chain, I actually have internal customers as well. And the external customer I have to think of as mine and not just someone who belongs to my sales team. And therefore, if I can keep thinking about how the supply chain delivers value to the customer, then I become aligned on a business goal. And then exactly as Richard says, it's a business transformation. It's the supply chain delivering something for the business and not just wanting to transform itself, and that hopefully then pulls you all into that overarching goal.
Look, I think we're in a much stronger position these days. I think 5 years ago plus, no one really cared about us in supply chain. We were like a bit of a nuisance, a bit of a hygiene factor for the business. I think Brexit, pandemic, everything else that's been going on recently, we've just become a bunch of rock stars, haven't we? And the CEOs, the CFOs, they look at us and actually realise how vital to the business we are. And I think that is a great position to be in. And I think probably the biggest bit of advice I've had and continue to take forward is to make sure that whenever I'm engaging with any of these other stakeholders that are outside of supply chain, that we're really establishing very early on in the process what's in it for them. Because ultimately that's what people want to know. If we want to engage them, they need to understand how they fit into the bigger picture. And if we can give them a really clear view of what that looks like, and that's not always possible, but we can do our best to outline that, to get them to buy into the vision, to get them to buy into how this impacts on their bit of the business and ultimately on their outcomes and their targets, then I think that really helps and really engages them through the process.
Yes, supply chain is officially the sexiest part of any business. We all know that, and I promise and I officially will not be saying that to the delegates at our FinTech event in November. I don't say that to them too. Right, let's go to the room. Do we have any questions for our panel? I have further ones I'd want to go through, but do we have any questions from the room? Just at the front there.
Hello, everyone. I think we did talk about the journey of supply chain transformation and the challenges what we face. In your experience, what's the readiness which also needs to be activated to operate in a transformed supply chain? Because it's where there is an opportunity of roles mixing, there is a new technology, maybe the information which is coming, it's cross-enterprise. So what have you, in your experience, brought into this mix where in the transformed supply chain, they are able to run well?
So one thought for me, I'm not sure if that's working. It's working. So one thought for me is we talk about supply chain transformation. So, we're going to start here and then, in 12 months' time, we're going to have everything's fixed and we're going to be here. And in reality, it often doesn't work like that. It's as much a continuous process. And sort of getting the business used to the idea that it has this need to constantly evolve its supply chain rather than have a revolution and, hopefully this time next year I've got lots of AI in place. If you can keep that culture of having continuous improvement in the supply chain, it's a lot easier than trying to always drop on a big program and get everyone bought into that. And the troubles I've seen in my own supply chain is that for such a long time it never did anything, didn't really change, didn't keep itself updated. Then suddenly we hit all the supply chain problems a year or two ago, buy lots of stock to deal with this, and then suddenly realise we've just bought the wrong stock, and now without any ability to control ourselves on the way up, it's pretty hard to control yourself on the way down. So almost seeing transformation as a continual process of evolution and having a business that's happy to do that, I think is easier than trying to sell a big bang, here's a big change for us.
Yeah, and certainly what I'm seeing across a broad range of industries is the need for visibility and resilience is driving transformation in the supply chain. So, post-pandemic, and pandemic things change. And the World Health Organization put out a report in 2019 of the 10 most likely disasters to happen in 2020. Pandemic wasn't on there. And so, unsurprisingly, not many people were prepared for a pandemic. And it hit, and it changed everything, and it rewrote the rule book. And now there's a big desire among supply chain leaders that I'm seeing to get that visibility down the supply chain, because visibility allows action, allows preparation, allows a creation of resilience. Now that's driving a lot of change, because people are saying, right, how do I get it? Now that changes the paradigms, it changes how we work with our suppliers, the information that we pass back and forwards, it changes the data flows, and it changes how we analyse that data. So that's really driving a lot. And I think I couple that with, I've seen two ways that transformation is driven. One is the business say, we need to change. Supply chain leadership says we need better visibility, we need resilience. That tends to drive good outcomes. There's another side where the CIO and the IT function say, we've got this great technology that you should adapt or adopt. And I can see it coming with generative AI at the moment. Speaking to lots of IT functions saying, fantastic, how do we use generative AI? That's not the question to ask, and that can lead towards technology-led decisions that may not be in the best business interest.
This we'll call happy engineering.
Yes.
Yeah, I think operating a transformed business in a lot of cases is operating a business that is leaner, some might like to call it, or others might just say you've got rid of a lot of people, because that's ultimately it's a cost saving exercise rather than anything else, and we see that happen, and they usually aren't the good ones. The best transformations that we get involved with tend to be about redeploying people to areas where they can add more value. And we've seen that, again, across industries, but especially in the food space over the last few years. And I think keep going on about it, but the change piece, the communication, the making sure that everybody is really clear on what their roles and responsibilities are in the new look business is critical to that.
Okay, we have time for one further question, just at the back there, please, Tracy.
Hi, Liam Parkin. I'm a change consultant. I'm wondering how you measure the benefits of transformations that you've done and whether they were worth the investment, looking back over them, kind of the retrospectives.
I mean, to my mind, there's always a financial metric. So you ought to be able to take it back in terms of where does hit my bottom line for EBITDA. And if you're working in PE, it will always be about that EBITDA, because somebody wants to drive an exit multiple. And I think if you don't have those sort of success measures, first you'll have something that's purely for supply chain that we feel things are better, but no one else is seeing the benefits, and therefore it's really hard to get that buy-in. So to me, it's always got to be some sort of financial measure.
Yeah, I mean, typically the projects that I tend to work on are about logs and COGS improvements. The challenge working with SMEs is that kind of whatever industry standard looks like, when you're a growing business, you're never going to be hitting that. So, what's the low-hanging fruit? Where can we make some changes that aren't going to affect the ability of the business to grow? Most of the brands that I work with, saving a penny on the cost of production is not going to move the needle. Whereas if you're working in a multi-billion-pound business, then obviously all those things are hugely beneficial.
Yeah, I think I'd echo those. It's about the key metrics of the organisation, be they financial, be they customer satisfaction, be they people, be they sustainability, and metrics are growing, and different organisations are quoting different ones, but it has to tie back to those business KPIs.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe that is it for questions. So a warm round of applause for Phil Peters from YF, Richard Bolton from Capgemini, and Phil Coughlin at Survive Tech.